Summer 1864, the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. A Confederate cavalry regiment charged through the trees, 200 men on horseback, sabers drawn, ready to overwhelm what they thought was a small Union patrol. But as they burst into the clearing, they heard something that made their blood run cold. Not the single crack of musket fire, not the thunderous volley of a line of soldiers, something else, something continuous, something that sounded like the devil breathing. Crack, 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 crack. 7 shots in as many seconds, then another 7, then another, no pause to reload, no break in the fire, just an endless stream of bullets tearing through the cavalry ranks. Horses screamed, men fell, the charge disintegrated into panic, and as the survivors fled, they spread a terrified rumor through the Confederate army. The Yankees had a new weapon, a gun that never stopped firing. A gun that could kill an entire regiment before a soldier could reload his musket once. They called it the Devil's Breath. Its real name was the Spencer repeating rifle, and it was about to change warfare forever. Introduction. Welcome, friends. I am so glad you are here with me today. When we think about the Civil War, we usually picture soldiers in neat lines, firing muskets, pausing to reload, firing again. We imagine a war fought at walking speed, where battles took all day and cavalry charges could still turn the tide. But by 1864, a new kind of war was emerging. A war of rapid fire and overwhelming firepower. A war where one man with the right weapon could do the work of 10. The Spencer repeating rifle was not the first repeating rifle, but it was the first one that worked reliably. The first one that was produced in large numbers, the first one that truly terrified the enemy. Confederate soldiers who faced it said it was like fighting men who could reload by magic. Union soldiers who carried it said it made them feel invincible. And the man who invented it, he had to fight his own army just to get them to use it. Today we are going to tell the story of the Spencer rifle, the weapon that changed the Civil War, the gun that introduced America to the age of rapid fire. If you love these hidden stories of Civil War technology and innovation, stories about how new inventions changed the course of history, I hope you will subscribe to our channel. Now, let us go back to 1860, to a young inventor with a revolutionary idea. Background: the problem with muskets. To understand why the Spencer rifle was so revolutionary, you need to understand how soldiers fought in 1861. The standard weapon of the Civil War was the rifled musket. The most common was the Springfield Model 1861. It was a good weapon for its time, accurate, reliable, deadly at several hundred yards, but it had one enormous limitation. It could only fire once before it had to be reloaded, and reloading was slow. A well-trained soldier could fire perhaps 3 rounds per minute. That meant in a battle you fired once, then spent 20 seconds standing there completely vulnerable while you reloaded. Here is what you had to do to reload a rifled musket. First, reach into your cartridge box and pull out a paper cartridge containing powder and a bullet. Bite off the end of the cartridge. Pour the powder down the barrel. Drop the bullet in after it. Pull out your ramrod. Ram the bullet down the barrel, return the ramrod, half-cock your hammer, place a percussion cap on the nipple, full-cock your hammer, aim, fire, 9 separate steps. If you were under fire being shot at, watching your friends die around you, you had to perform all 9 steps correctly or your weapon would not fire. And after one shot, you had to do it all over again. This limitation shaped Civil War tactics. Soldiers fought in dense formations because you needed massive firepower to compensate for the slow rate of fire. Cavalry could still charge infantry because after one volley, the infantry was defenseless for 20 seconds. But some soldiers had started to wonder, what if you did not have to reload after every shot? What if you could just keep firing? The concept was not new. Repeating firearms had existed since the 1600s, but they were expensive, fragile, and often unreliable. Most burst after a few shots or jammed constantly. By the 1850s, several inventors were working on practical repeating rifles. The most famous was the Henry rifle, which could fire 16 rounds, but it was expensive and delicate. And then came Christopher Spencer. The inventor, Christopher Spencer. Christopher Minor Spencer was born in 1833 in Manchester, Connecticut. He was a natural mechanic. By the time he was a teenager, he was working in machine shops, learning how to design and build precision instruments. Spencer was fascinated by the problem of rapid fire. He studied existing repeating firearms, he saw their flaws, and he thought he could do better. In 1860, at the age of 27, Spencer designed a new kind of repeating rifle. His design was brilliantly simple. The rifle used a tubular magazine in the buttstock that held 7 metallic cartridges. You loaded the magazine from the rear, then you operated a lever under the trigger guard, dropped the lever and it ejected the spent cartridge and loaded a fresh one. Raised the lever and the gun was ready to fire. 7 shots, no ramrods, no powder flasks, no paper cartridges. Just pull the trigger, drop the lever, pull the trigger again. Spencer knew he had invented something important. He applied for a patent in 1860, but getting a patent and getting the Army to adopt your weapon were two very different things, and the United States Army in 1861 did not want to change. The fight for adoption. When the Civil War began in April of 1861, Christopher Spencer tried to sell his rifle to the Army Ordnance Department. The Ordnance Department was led by Chief of Ordnance James Ripley. Ripley was 67 years old. He had been in the Army since 1814. He was competent, experienced, and deeply conservative. Ripley did not like newfangled weapons. He liked the Springfield rifled musket. It was proven, it was reliable. And most importantly, millions of rounds of ammunition already existed for it. When Spencer demonstrated his rifle, Ripley was unimpressed. He saw problems, not possibilities. Soldiers will waste ammunition, Ripley said. They will fire too quickly and exhaust their supply. Spencer argued that rapid fire could win battles. Ripley countered that rapid fire just meant rapid resupply problems. The metallic cartridges are too expensive, Ripley said. We cannot afford to supply the entire army with them. Spencer pointed out that one man with a Spencer could do the work of 5 men with muskets. Ripley replied that it was cheaper to recruit 5 men than to buy one Spencer rifle, but Spencer's biggest problem was not Ripley's objections, it was timing. In the summer of 1861, the Union Army was being built from nothing. The government needed hundreds of thousands of muskets immediately. They did not have time to retool factories for a new weapon. They needed something that could be produced now, and the Springfield could be produced now. Spencer's rifle was rejected, but Spencer did not give up. He found a private manufacturer, the Spencer Repeating Rifle Company in Boston. He started producing rifles on his own, and he started selling them to individual officers and regiments who were willing to pay out of their own pockets. Some cavalry units bought Spencer rifles. Some mounted infantry units bought them. Word started to spread. The Yankees have a rifle that fires 7 times without reloading. The rifle in action. The first significant use of Spencer rifles in combat came in December of 1862 at the Battle of Hartsville, Tennessee. A small Union force armed partly with Spencer rifles was attacked by a much larger Confederate force. The Confederates expected a quick victory. What they got was a shock. The Union soldiers with Spencers poured fire into the Confederate ranks at a rate the Southerners had never seen. One Union soldier later wrote that the Confederates seemed paralyzed with astonishment at the volume of fire coming from such a small force. The Union force was eventually overwhelmed by sheer numbers, but the Confederates took far more casualties than they expected, and Confederate officers began writing worried reports about this new Yankee rifle. But the real demonstration of the Spencer's power came in 1863 with Colonel John Wilder's Lightning Brigade. Colonel Wilder commanded a mounted infantry brigade in the Army of the Cumberland. Mounted infantry were soldiers who rode horses for mobility but fought on foot. Wilder wanted his men to have the best weapons available. He went to the Spencer Company and arranged to buy Spencer rifles for his entire brigade. He did not ask the Army for permission. He did not wait for official approval. He borrowed money, bought the rifles himself, and arranged for his men to pay him back out of their salaries. In June of 1863, Wilder's Lightning Brigade fought at the Battle of Hoover's Gap in Tennessee. They faced a Confederate force nearly twice their size. But Wilder's men, armed with Spencer rifles, held a mountain pass against repeated Confederate attacks. They fired so rapidly that the Confederates thought they were facing a force many times larger. One Confederate officer said it sounded like the noise of 1,000 wood choppers. Another said his men seemed to be fighting an entire army that had no need to reload. Wilder's brigade held the gap. The Confederates withdrew, and the Union commanders started paying attention. Maybe this Spencer rifle was worth a second look. The weapon spread. By 1864, the Spencer rifle was finally beginning to be adopted in significant numbers. The Union cavalry in particular loved the Spencer. A cavalryman armed with a Spencer could ride into range, dismount, and lay down devastating fire, then remount and ride away before the enemy could respond. At the Battle of Chickamauga in September of 1863, Union cavalry armed with Spencer rifles held off repeated Confederate attacks. The Confederates simply could not close with troops who could fire 7 times in rapid succession. Confederate Cavalry General Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the most successful cavalry commanders of the war, wrote with frustration about fighting Spencer-armed Union cavalry. He called them that damned Yankee rifle they load on Sunday and shoot all week. But the real turning point came when the rifle reached President Lincoln himself. Christopher Spencer, frustrated with the Ordnance Department, requested a meeting with the president. Lincoln, always interested in new technology, agreed to see him. In August of 1863, Spencer demonstrated his rifle for President Lincoln on the grounds behind the White House. Lincoln, who had grown up on the frontier and was an excellent shot, fired the rifle himself. He was impressed, very impressed. Lincoln called in the Chief of Ordnance. He did not quite order Ripley to adopt the Spencer, but he made his preference very clear. Shortly afterward, Ripley retired and the new Chief of Ordnance began ordering Spencer rifles in large quantities. By 1864, Spencer rifles were being issued to cavalry units across the Union Army. Production ramped up. By the end of the war, over 94,000 Spencer rifles had been manufactured, and Confederate soldiers learned to fear the sound of rapid fire. The devil's breath. Confederate soldiers came up with many names for the Spencer rifle. Some called it the rifle that loads itself, others called it the 7-shooter. But the name that stuck, at least in legend, was the devil's breath. The name came from the sound. When multiple soldiers with Spencer rifles fired together, it created a continuous roar unlike anything heard before in warfare, not the crash of a volley, but a sustained, crackling sound that went on and on. It sounded like breathing, fast, angry breathing. The breath of something that would not stop until you were dead. Confederate soldiers who survived engagements with Spencer-armed troops spoke of the psychological impact. It was not just that the Union soldiers could fire more rounds, it was that they never seemed to stop firing. With muskets, there was rhythm to combat. Fire, reload, brief moments when both sides were reloading and no one was shooting. Moments when you could move, when you could think, when you could breathe. But against Spencer rifles, there were no pauses. The fire just kept coming. If you tried to charge, you were cut down. If you tried to take cover, bullets kept smashing into your cover. There was no respite, no moment of safety, and the worst part, the Confederacy could not produce Spencer rifles for their own troops. The Spencer used metallic cartridges. The Confederacy did not have the industrial capacity to manufacture metallic cartridges in large quantities. They could barely produce enough paper cartridges for their muskets. So Confederate soldiers faced an enemy with superior weapons and no way to match them. They had to rely on tactics, on fieldcraft, on courage. But courage could only do so much against 7 rounds of rapid fire. The impact on warfare. The Spencer rifle did not win the Civil War by itself. The war was won by superior numbers, superior industry, superior logistics, and the generalship of Grant and Sherman. But the Spencer changed how battles were fought. Cavalry armed with Spencer rifles became far more effective. They could hold positions against infantry. They could break up charges. They could raid deep into enemy territory and fight their way out. At the Battle of Nashville in December of 1864, Union cavalry armed with Spencers helped destroy the Confederate Army of Tennessee. They pursued the retreating Confederates relentlessly, firing from the saddle, reloading while riding, never giving the enemy a moment to regroup. Infantry tactics began to change as well. Units armed with Spencer rifles could hold positions with fewer men. They could deliver firepower that previously required an entire brigade. But perhaps most importantly, the Spencer demonstrated a principle that would dominate warfare for the next 150 years. Firepower wins battles. It did not matter how brave you were, how well-trained, how determined. If the enemy could shoot 7 times while you shot once, you were going to lose. This was a hard lesson for professional soldiers to accept. For centuries, warfare had been about discipline, about formations, about courage. But the Spencer rifle showed that technology could trump all of those things. One man with a Spencer rifle could kill 7 men with muskets before any of them could reload. That was not about bravery, that was about math. After the war, When the Civil War ended in April of 1865, the United States Army owned nearly 100,000 Spencer rifles. And then almost immediately they started getting rid of them. This seems insane now. Why would you discard a superior weapon? But the Army had its reasons. First, the war was over. The Army was being drastically reduced. They did not need 100,000 rifles of any kind. Second, metallic cartridges were still more expensive than paper cartridges. With no war to fight, cost mattered more than effectiveness. Third, a new generation of rifles was already being developed. Single-shot breechloaders that were almost as fast as repeaters but used less ammunition and were more accurate at long range. So the Spencer rifles were sold as surplus. Many went west. Frontiersmen and buffalo hunters loved them. Native Americans acquired them through trade. The Spencer became one of the most common rifles of the American West in the 1870s. Christopher Spencer, meanwhile, kept inventing. He designed new firearms, including a pump-action shotgun. He founded other companies. He became wealthy. He died in 1922 at the age of 88, having lived to see warfare transformed into something he would hardly have recognized. But his name is forever attached to the rifle that changed the Civil War. Legacy: the birth of rapid fire. Friends, the Spencer rifle was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. Once soldiers had experienced rapid fire, there was no going back. The post-war decades saw an explosion of repeating rifle designs: the Winchester, the Remington, the Colt. By the 1880s, every modern army in the world was adopting repeating rifles. By the end of the century, machine guns had arrived, taking the concept of rapid fire to its ultimate conclusion. And it all started with Christopher Spencer's simple idea. Put the ammunition in a tube in the stock, use a lever to load and eject, fire 7 times without reloading. That idea changed everything. The Spencer rifle marked the end of Napoleonic warfare. No more tightly packed formations, no more standing in the open to reload, no more cavalry charges against prepared infantry. War was about to become faster, deadlier, and more impersonal. The Spencer rifle was the first step down that road. Reflection: the cost of innovation. As we think about the Spencer rifle, we have to wrestle with an uncomfortable truth. This weapon saved Union lives. Soldiers armed with Spencer rifles had a much better chance of survival than soldiers armed with muskets. They could fire faster, stay under cover longer, defend themselves more effectively. But the Spencer also made killing easier. It made battles more lethal. It turned individual soldiers into killing machines capable of devastating firepower. Was this progress, or was it just making war more horrible? I think the answer is both. Technology does not have morality. The Spencer rifle was neither good nor evil. It was a tool. It could be used to defend freedom or to take lives. Sometimes it did both at once. What the Spencer did was change the equation of warfare. It made defense stronger. It made firepower more important than numbers. It rewarded innovation and punished those who clung to the old ways. And it showed that in war, the side with better technology usually wins. This is a truth we still live with today. Our modern military is built on the principle that technological superiority can overcome numerical disadvantage. That principle started with rifles like the Spencer. As we close today, I want you to imagine that Confederate cavalry charge one more time. 200 men thundering through the trees, sabers raised, ready for glory, and then that sound, that terrible continuous sound, the devil's breath, crack, 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 crack. For centuries, warfare had moved at the speed of a man reloading a musket. 3 shots per minute, enough time to think, enough time to be brave. But the Spencer rifle changed all that. It brought warfare into the modern age. An age where battles were decided in seconds, where firepower mattered more than courage, where the side with better weapons usually won. Confederate soldiers feared the Spencer rifle, and they were right to fear it, not because it was evil, but because it represented the future. A future where war would become faster, more lethal, and more decisive. Christopher Spencer did not set out to terrify his enemies. He just wanted to build a better rifle. But in doing so, he created a weapon that changed the nature of combat forever. The devil's breath was the sound of the future arriving. Friends, if this story fascinated you, please share it. The history of military technology is full of moments like this when one innovation changed everything. And tell me in the comments, had you heard of the Spencer rifle before? What do you think about how technology changes warfare? I read every comment. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep their memory alive.